Hello, thank you for joining me. Today, I want to talk about the importance of the narrative that we use. Lots of different types of narratives. The first one being narratives that professionals use either in the paperwork or through verbal communication when discussing parents and young people to professionals, and actually in front of the child as well. The narrative that sometimes is used online that can be really harmful and sometimes can come across passive aggressive or just total aggression. People think that they can say what they want online and that there's no impact. Or they're trying to have an impact and they don't really care how that affects somebody. And also the narrative that I use to inform my son. So today I want to talk about the importance of narrative. Now, the reason why I've wanted to bring this up today is because I've been looking at all my son's paperwork. I've got boxes and boxes of paperwork, as I'm sure some of you have as well. And some of those assessments, some of those is relating to his diagnosis. Some of them are transcripts of conversations that I've had with professionals. And I've started to really look at the narrative that professionals use to describe Joseph and also just justify sometimes why services have come to a stop in terms of therapy. And one of the things that I see quite a lot within the paperwork is, and not just my paperwork, but other paperwork that I've seen when I'm supporting families, is child refuses to engage or parents are not engaging. So therefore therapies are now being withdrawn. And I can remember in terms of my own circumstances when reading that statement, how it actually made me feel. And when you're sitting your child in front of a person who they don't know, in a very adult-led environment, which might not agree with their sensory differences at the time. And because of that, my child's not being able to access that session, particularly recently, actually, because the sessions have been online. And then for some children, that therapy is stopped because the child won't engage. It's not actually that the child won't engage or the child refuses to engage. It's maybe more to do with that therapeutic session and the way that it's being delivered is not appropriate. And so therefore it's making it really difficult for the child to engage. So the child will go into fight or flight and do instinctively what they need to do to survive. And that is either maybe having a meltdown or withdrawing. And whether that's through verbal communication, saying, I don't want to do it, or whether that's sitting there and not speaking because the brain is shut down and can't communicate. Lots of different reasons. And I think we need to start looking at the reasons why children are not engaging in certain circumstances, and not to question the child themselves, but actually question the environment that we're putting that child in and then expecting that child to conform. And I have noticed that some of the therapeutic sessions that are available in the main are very mainstream, and we're not looking outside of the box in terms of therapeutic support systems. and I do think we've got a long way to go around gathering up lots of information from children with special educational needs and disabilities, including autism, around why they're finding those sessions really uncomfortable to the point where they can't access. And they might have been on the waiting list for absolutely ages, but then that service is taken away from them because the child's not able to access. That is not the fault of the child. And so that is something that I feel that we need to look at. And also the narrative that professionals can use in the paperwork as well. And sometimes can be quite suggestive. Not only in terms of the children, but the adults as well. And I've seen, paperwork where the adults will not engage. And I've heard other professionals say, well, the family's not engaging, the child's not engaging, the parents aren't engaging. What more can we do? And again, we need to support the professionals in terms of their knowledge and skill set around looking at why that family's not engaging. Is it because they've been through that much trauma that they are now just haven't got the emotional capacity to engage, because they know that therapy session is going to be really, really stressful for their child. And they themselves are coming from a place of complete exhaustion and maybe can't cope with a 2-hour conversation around talking about their child's needs before that therapy can even start, or they can't cope with being expected to write a daily diary around recognising their child's triggers to form a picture. That's actually quite difficult, I think, sometimes for a parent to be able to be expected to write everything down in order to recognise triggers. Some parents won't even know what a trigger is. And how to recognise that and to document it and write it down. That's asking a lot. And that makes me feel that sometimes services aren't aware of what, that is quite a big piece of work to ask that parent to do, even before the work can start itself. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around understanding what you're asking of those parents and how important the narrative is when you communicate yourself to parents and when you talk about the child within the paperwork, because sometimes the narrative it's really old-fashioned and it's not always accurate. And that brings me on to the next subject. So my son is autistic. He's 13 years old, and in the early days, the only jargon that I used to hear in terms of anything official was from professionals. So I would have a conversation with professionals and they would talk to me about autism, and they would use certain phrases and a certain narrative to try and educate me about autism and about my child. And so when you're being exposed to that for the first time, you don't know any different. And so you take that information and then you use the same narrative, maybe talk about other autistic children or other people in the community with the autistic community. And what I've actually worked out is there's a lot of adults in the autistic community that are really, really angry and upset about the narrative used to describe them. And, I've been on quite a few sites on social media, and it can actually get really, really close to the bone in terms of negativity. And I've always said my intentions have always been for the greater good, and I'm always wanting to educate myself about autism, because my child is autistic. And he's only 13 as well. So he's still relatively young in his journey, and he hasn't yet reached a stage in his life. And I am able to say this because it's my child and I live with him and I know him. He hasn't reached a stage in his life where he's made up his mind how he wants to describe himself. It's not a thing. There's no need for him to do that at the moment, because he's still finding himself. He's, as a person, as a human being, he's 13 years old. And so I haven't got him saying, look, Mum, you're a neurotypical person, I'm a neurodiverse person. What you're actually saying to me, I find offensive. So we haven't reached that stage yet. So he's still learning. And at the minute, sometimes I'm his informer, but he also informs me as well. So I'm learning all the time. And I think it's up to the individual person to say how they would like to be described or how they would like to describe themselves. I think it's a very personal choice. And I don't think anybody should ever judge anybody for wanting to describe themselves in any particular way. Something that I do feel very passionately about is, and this is from a TA's perspective as well, I wish I'd had more access to training from an autistic person. The training that I've paid for, I suppose, because there wasn't any training involved when I did my teaching assistant qualification. So any external training I've done is I've paid for that myself. That was a personal choice. However, I think there was one person out of all the training was neurodiverse, and the rest of the trainers were neurotypical. And there was such a massive difference between the training that I received from the neurodiverse person and the training that I received from a neurotypical person. And I watched Andy Smith's Q&A live today on all around sensory differences, and he's a fantastic autistic advocate. He's an amazing young man. And I came away just with, I was absolutely blown away with the knowledge that he had, which I wasn't surprised at. And, that's what I would like to see from all educators on autism, because the best educators on autism are from people that have autism and are autistic. Because I spoke about this in my last video, is that as neurotypical people, we can tend to put our neurotypical expectations on neurodiverse people, and it just, doesn't work. And I suppose when we talk about the narrative that we use as well, again, when I listen to Andy and the way he speaks, it really makes me question and really looks on the importance of the way I speak about my son. And again, he's 13, so he's not yet in a position to, because he's a lot younger than 13, I might just add. I'm not being patronizing there. He's a lot younger than 13. So I'm looking for role models within the autistic community to give me that insight, because they are adults and they are working in an adult world. And so I need help and guidance around potentially what my son's future is going to look like as an adult person. And the best people to educate me on that are the autistics. So I just wanted to talk to you about the importance of the narrative and how much we should be listening to autistic people in terms of training. about autistics. It just makes total sense, doesn't it? I'm not really quite sure why it isn't already happening across the country, left, right, and centre. I'm sure it is, but I haven't heard of it. So when Joseph was first of all given his diagnosis of autism, which was only 2 years ago, I was given a very mainstream leaflet from CAMS that I didn't feel was appropriate for Joseph. So I didn't give it to Joseph. I read it, and it was a very real basic guide. I wasn't referred on to any support groups. I was kind of discharged, and it was, you've got autism. Joseph is autistic. Goodbye. That was kind of what I felt in terms of receiving more information. So I really feel that even at diagnosis point, I would have loved it if they'd have given me Andy Smith's details. There you go. Go and listen to his talks, because he's an amazing autistic advocate. But there's nothing, and that we need to be looking at autistic people as role models for our autistic children, and we need to be looking at how important the narrative is when professionals are communicating to parents and to children, and how that is being transferred into the paperwork. Because if you've not had any insight into autism before, and the first conversations that you're having are with professionals, that is the first bit of knowledge that you're going to be receiving. And some of that information isn't accurate in terms of the narrative that's used. Then you're going to take that information, aren't you? And you're going to pass it on. So I think we need to be looking at the way professionals are using the narrative in schools to other mainstream children about autistic children. It's let's look at the wider community, and let's step out of the 1940s and step into the century that we're in at the minute, because I really don't think it's reflected. And so I just really wanted to talk to you about that, because reading through all my paperwork, actually now I'm more informed, because my intent is to educate myself, because I'm a neurotypical person, and I can't possibly know what it's like for my son. So he has to take the lead in telling me how he feels and in his wants, and I have to listen to him. Now I'm more informed, and I listen to other autistic people that now in adulthood. Now I look at the paperwork, I think, oh gosh, it's quite shocking sometimes, the narrative that we're still using. So this is something that I feel is worth investing in, and I just wanted to share my perspective from a neurotypical point of view, bringing up a neurodiverse child, and that I will admit to in the past using narratives that might some might be inappropriate, but my intentions are always good. And I'm always wanting to learn as a professional and a practitioner as well. I'm always wanting to learn. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.